I have swaddled myself in preparation for this video, in which I am going to share 5 ways that my wounded inner child has certainly shown up in my creative work in life. And it might not be the same for everybody, but I certainly know that for me, these things, I think, having seen and observed them as well in others, such as the students I have taught over many years, hundreds of students over many years, that sort of foundation level, as well as a lot of the artists and creative people that I have researched and engaged with. There are a lot of similar stories. So the first one is needing to be special, and this relates to the ego. So the ego is a necessary part of us. We could say that we are just oneness, and nobody is anyone, and nobody is any better or worse than anyone else, and things just are. But at the same time, we do function as individual, distinct bodies, and this for children, certainly when they are told, and when I was told or seen for sort of being special, or oh, aren't you good, aren't you amazing, aren't you clever, aren't you wonderful, aren't you fantastic, isn't it amazing that you can spell all those words, isn't it fantastic, look at that artwork you've done. And the correlation between certainly being special and being creative and having an expressive or creative gift in the world is definitely a shadow that comes with the inner child kind of drive to create. And of course, everyone wants to be special, everyone deserves to be special, but when we see that as being distinct from others, it can get really messy. And when that becomes our motivation for creating, and when we feel sad or disappointed because we're comparing ourselves to others who are being lauded as being special and wonderful, and we feel not so much, that can really be very painful, and it can actually point to the fact that there are some inner child wounds there that need tending to, and that the creative outlet might not be helping. Certainly for me, sometimes it has pointed me towards the fact that I have work to do in terms of being able to feel okay in myself, not being different, not being better, and that becomes very toxic and competitive anyway, which is something I'm going to come back to in point 3. But point 2, related to needing to be special, is needing to be seen, heard, loved, and this can drive us to create and to be fueled by a real kind of urgency, the need to be witnessed. It can come about through exhibitionism. It can really mean that we are making not for ourselves, but because we want to be seen or heard. And I see this sometimes in people who are sharing, like, I need to get this music heard, and ultimately the music, the work that's coming through, it's got to be for, well, in my opinion, it has to be for the person who is channeling it. It has to be organically come through them, and where it gets sticky is you're doing it because you want to be seen or heard. And certainly for me, I was probably driven, and I like to use the term driven because Gabor Mate, and there might be other people who have said this, but that's where I heard it, used a beautiful distinction, and it was between a calling and a drive. So when we are driven as in, like, we're driven by a sort of urgency, like it's like driving a motorbike or something. We've got a rocket up our arse that's forcing us to do something, whereas a calling is kind of like, it's something that you receive on the phone, you can pick it up or not, and it's a softer but still important and very significant thing to receive. I like to think of the Judgment card in the tarot as relevant to this as well. But basically, needing to be seen, heard, and there's exhibitionism that can come up there, is really that little sort of wounded inner child that needs to be acknowledged and witnessed, and that's what we all need ultimately. And I think that's not something to undermine. This is not saying that this is a bad thing, and it's not attempting to pathologize that this is the case. Rather, it's just an acknowledgement that these things do often drive our callings. And certainly for me, I have in my creative work definitely been driven by a need to be seen and feeling pretty isolated a lot of my life, and like I lack the ability to connect with others, and then really needing to be then like compensate for that somehow through the creative performance, but let's say. The third point is the third thing that, I can't remember the title of the video now, the third thing that is the inner child manifesting in a wounded inner child manifesting in the creative shadow play is the toxic patterns. And this might manifest differently for everybody. For me, it's isolation. There's some narcissistic traits that I definitely have. I don't think I'm a narcissist because I'm very aware, although there's obviously traits such as that exhibitionism, such as maybe using other people to validate your specialness or need to be seen, loved, heard. Certainly that comes up in a lot of creatives, and a lot of people that are at the top of their game are incredibly narcissistic, and people are simply, like, other people are simply tools to fuel that supply, of getting the audience, getting the validation, getting the praise, getting the acclaim, getting the accolades. And often they do say that psychopaths, most people in like really high leadership are psychopaths. So there's a psychopathic trait that is, the three traits, the Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and narcissism do show up in a lot of people that are very successful leaders. And it's the same, I think, for really successful creatives. There's often narcissism present. Certainly there's also a compulsiveness about creativity, where one might compulsively make and share and exhibit themselves when actually they're not getting any inner need met, and they're not looking after themselves. And I certainly have been doing this quite a lot, and maybe this YouTube video is an example of that. Again, not to judge, just to observe. Also the isolation, and certainly for me, I think that I was always the person who would get to a party or an event, and I could, if there's a piano there, that would be like, okay, yeah, an instrument, any musical instrument. It would be, sometimes it's beautiful because it is beautiful. It's the way that one can drop in and feel present in an environment, especially when there's lots of people around. It can be quite anxiety inducing. Certainly for me, I'm a highly sensitive person, HSP. No, I mean, I think I am though. We all kind of, that's maybe a way of being special. But being highly sensitive and getting into a space, the first thing I would always do is, if there was a piano there, that would be like beeline for the piano, because it would be where I could, just take a moment and like do my thing. And now I often take musical instruments around, or I sing, because it's beautiful, and that's just a way that I soothe myself in those environments. Moving on to number 4, which is self-sabotage. So the wounded child might drive us to do things that, even though we know we want to, we don't do it. There's that form of self-sabotage. There's the form of self-sabotage of getting really far with something and then just like destroying it, or just, abandoning it, not finishing it, not putting it out in the world, because all of the voices, all of the doubts, all of the life suppression and all of the shame comes in, and it stops us from sharing, really, and it stops us from just letting that through, whatever it was, what was wanting to come through in the poetry, in the painting. And then there's this sort of self-protection, self-sabotage possibly that comes in relation to that. And it can also look like procrastination, block, and there's a term they use in obviously in eating disorders, but in sex and love addiction, as well as other forms of addiction. I mean, there's sobriety, but there's a term that they use called anorexia, and I don't just mean in the eating disorder sense, but there's a creative anorexia, whereby you can basically not doing, like, not just like eat for anorexics, not eating, and I'm not drawing an equivalence with anorexia or eating disorders. It's not the same. I know that it's not fatal in the same way for creative people, although there are a lot of cases of creative people and the death rate of that in terms of suicide, those kinds of things, and addiction is quite high because of how those things have been related over the years, partly probably because of how creativity is held and taught, and how creative people are usually more sensitive. But the anorexia thing is more that thing of knowing that there is an activity or something that nourishes. And in sex and love addiction, it is about love and relationships. And relationship anorexia would be just completely like withdrawing from and abandoning and avoiding all relationship completely. And creative anorexia would be, just depriving yourself of the time in the studio, or the time showing up at the page, the time singing, whatever the activity that nourishes you is. That would be the creative anorexia, and that's a form of self-sabotage, where the wounded inner child is probably coming in to try and protect you from something. And the last point is the positive. It's more, I'm going to frame it positively. And all of this is framed neutrally, I'll add. But framing this one on a positive note to end is that the term repetition compulsion comes to mind, and the term corrective experience comes to mind. So repetition compulsion is something that we feel a need to repeat something, and to repeat an old scenario, to engineer a situation which will basically allow us an opportunity to have a corrective experience. So there might have been an instance or a scenario where you were at school and a teacher shamed you for drawing incorrectly, or something happened where you were embarrassed performing or getting up in front of people, and then there will be this attempt in various situations, in various life scenarios, to try and recreate that situation. And you might go through life thinking like, why does this always happen to me? Why do I always start to make my artwork and then it gets destroyed? Or why do I get up in front of an audience and I just bottle it and it's shit? And it's really that there's probably a trauma there in relation to something that did happen earlier on. But the repetition to try to have that experience again, in the safety of your adult self, is actually an opportunity to relive that experience, but hold yourself in that experience. And when done with awareness, that can be very, very, very profoundly healing and transformative. So an example of this might be that I had an experience at school where, and this is education for you, which is another story, but I had an experience at school where people were awarded a pen when their handwriting wasn't neat enough. And this relates to all of the things I've talked about already, about being special, needing to be special, needing to be seen or heard, needing to be, the best or whatever. And you got awarded a pen when your handwriting was neat enough, and the people that got that first were like, everyone was sort of jealous of them. And I remember I was like really always like, if there was a spelling test or something or anything, I was always in really high up in the class, and academically that was always the case. And I was really attached to that identity of being someone in that kind of guise. And I think it was about year 3 or 4, so around the age of 8, 9, 10, 8, 9-ish, this upgrade from pencil to pen was happening, and I was one of the last people in the class basically for it to happen to. And I've definitely had a thing with my handwriting in terms of wanting to make a font recently, and I did make a font for my own website, But I think a lot of that attempt to and that desire to create a font with not like in a designy kind of way, but in a handwritten way, was an attempt to have a corrective experience. But leading up to making that font, I was an anxious wreck and I was avoiding it, and I had this tablet and it was like, it's gonna be really hard, I'm gonna fuck it up, it's gonna be horrible, judging, like just avoiding and not doing it. And there have been many other experiences, definitely performance scenarios. Probably I was in a cabaret at school in year 6 and I was the presenter. But I think there were probably situations with singing actually that have led me down this path of performing and doing a lot of performances where I didn't rehearse before. My voice, like, I wasn't warmed up, wasn't ready to sing, yet I put myself on the stage and did that, and it was like, it was not ready, like my voice was not liking that, my body didn't feel safe. But ultimately doing that, pushing through, realising that, okay, that happened, I didn't die, do it again, do it again and again and again, and then you're fine, then you're good. So hopefully that's a little spin on this conversation that brings the wounded child theories and the creative flow, block, sabotage stuff together a little bit. And if you want to know more, like, subscribe, look up Heart School. There are a variety of things available. Connection circles where we come together live and hold space to unfurl some things around creative expression and shadow work, as well as courses eventually, and one-to-one coaching, which all the details are below about. So sorry, sometimes I try and like talk in this way that's really articulate and then the words come out the wrong way. But that's it for now. Relatable awkwardness. Thank you. Lots of love. Take care. Bye.